Story number 12, The Rock Thrower of Lamington. The forest was alive, its pulse hidden in the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. I was 42, Tom, hiking through Queensland's Lamington National Park with Belinda, the woman I hoped to build a life with, and her two boys, Jack and Ethan, 10 and 12. So I was heading on a hike to Lamington National Park with a woman that I was seeing for a few months at the time, Belinda. She brought along her two boys, 10 and 12. This was our chance to bond, to see if we could be a family. I had met them a few times, but this was going to be a good bonding experience to see how we get along on an overnight adventure. The cross circuit awaited, a trail my dad used to take me on, winding from mountain peaks to lush valleys. My old boy used to bring me up to this campsite called Beenabura. Our favorite hike was the cross circuit. Memories of those hikes flooded back, the forest a cathedral of green, but today something felt off, like the air was holding its breath. The air was thick with promise and rain. The drive from Brisbane was a thrill for the boys, their faces pressed to the windows as we climbed the twisting mountain road. The drive from Brisbane was good, and the boys loved the drive up the mountain. Belinda was quieter, her knuckles white on the door handle, her fear of heights a secret I just uncovered. Belinda, not so much. She apparently has a fear of heights, I learned. Showers came and went, slicking the trail with mud. But we had ponchos, and the kids were electric with excitement, chasing glimpses of blue yabbies and fireflies. There were on and off showers, and the track was slippery. But we packed ponchos, and the kids were having a blast as we set off on our track. The forest was a riot of life. Vibrant birds, darting reptiles, a kaleidoscope of color under a canopy of ancient trees. You start on the top of the mountain with all of the views, then descend down into the valleys where there's lush forest, waterfalls and whatnot. Stunning place teeming with an abundance of beautiful, colorful birds, reptiles, these bright blue yabbies that lay scattered along the tracks, fireflies, and a multitude of leeches and ticks. Trouble found us at the creek. Halfway through, Jack slipped on a slick rock, grazing his knee. We were about halfway through the hike when the youngest boy slipped and hurt his knee as we were crossing a creek. His cries echoed, more from shock than pain, and I patched him up, hoisting him onto my shoulders to calm him. I cleaned up the scrape and put on some Band-Aids and decided to carry him on my shoulders for a bit until he felt better. Belinda's laughter faded, her face tight as she scanned the trees. Belinda was acting quiet, and I thought maybe she wasn't enjoying herself. I asked if she was okay, her nod unconvincing, her eyes darting to the shadows. I asked if she was good, and she nodded and smiled and went along, gazing around quietly. The forest, once welcoming, now felt watchful, its beauty masking something darker. The forest turned hostile. A rumble shattered the quiet, branches snapping like breaking bones. We started heading up the mountain for a bit, and as we were walking, we could hear something thundering through the trees toward us. Branches snapping, loud impacts. A stone big as a basketball hurtled down the trail, bouncing past us, smashing into a tree. We look up the hill to see a large stone the size of a basketball flying down just ahead of us on the trail. My heart raced. This wasn't erosion. It was too deliberate. I warned everybody to watch out because sometimes with erosion, rocks can fall. We pressed on, eyes scanning the ridge above, wary of every rustle. We continued walking, though keeping an eye on the trail above for more rocks and debris as we zigzagged up and around the mountain. 5 minutes later, another rock crashed down, followed by a third, aimed too precisely. And only 5 minutes later, another rock came crashing down. This one was further away, but it was followed by another that was coming right toward us. It wasn't nature. I shouted up the mountain, voice raw, demanding the culprit stop. I shouted up the mountain that if it was someone doing that to stop that, there were hikers. Another rock answered, then two more, carving paths of destruction through the underbrush. In response, another rock flew down toward us. I screamed out that they were going to kill someone and that we had children with us. Two more large boulders crashed down the hill, leaving a trail of destruction. The boys clung to Belinda, her face pale, trembling. Another stone came crashing down, and by this point, the kids were crying and Belinda was shaking. Voices rose below, other hikers shouting the same complaints. We heard shouts of another 3 or 4 people. Another group of hikers further down the hill, shouting out the same complaints at us. A man from their group met us, breathless, but offered no answers. I told Belinda to stay with the kids and sprinted up the zigzag trail, lungs burning, desperate to confront whoever was endangering us. I told them to stay there and that I would run up ahead, and I did just that. I started running up the hill until I couldn't breathe any longer. At the ridge, the trail was empty, no footprints, no signs of life. I reached where the zigzag ended and continued along the mountain ridge. And when I did, no one was there. I pushed on, finding an elderly couple at a lookout, their faces calm, claiming they'd seen no one. I went up and down the trail until I reached an elderly couple sitting on a bench at a lookout. I talked to them for a few minutes, asking if they saw anything or any other hikers. They said that they hadn't, that they had come from the opposite way and hadn't seen anyone for ages. Their story didn't add up. The rocks had come from this direction, but the ridge was silent. The forest mocking my search. Defeated, I rejoined Belinda and the kids, now huddled with the other hikers. I went back down to Belinda and the kids. By this time, they were with the other hikers, and we did the last long leg of the journey together. We reached the lodge, the boys subdued, the air heavy with unspoken fear. We caught up with the old couple as well near the exit, at the shower blocks. Belinda pulled me aside, her voice a whisper. Belinda pulled me aside once she had the kids organized, and she told me that she didn't want to stay there overnight. She refused to stay, despite earlier excitement about the safari tents and our barbecue plans. Earlier, when we arrived, she said that she loved the safari tents, and we had plans to sit around the fire and have a nice barbecue dinner and all that. I pressed her, confused. So I asked her why, and she said that she didn't feel comfortable. I blamed teenagers, insisting the campsites were safe. I assured her that no one would try messing with us around the campsites, and it was probably just some stupid teenagers, and they wouldn't be a nuisance up here at the campgrounds and the lodge. Her words chilled me. She spoke of the creek when Jack fell. She said that when her boy had slipped in the water and was crying, she said that she thought that she saw something, a figure, tall and broad, cloaked in moss and leaves, blending into the forest. She said that it was big and brown, and when her eyes first scanned past it, she thought that it was just a part of the forest, like a log or a rock. But as she moved her eyes past it again, it moved. It was no illusion. She insisted, but she'd kept quiet to shield the boys. She said that she only saw it for a moment, but that she swore by it, that it was unmistakable. She said that she only saw it for a moment, so she just brushed it off as just a trick of the mind. The rocks confirmed her terror, then went on to say that after the rock thing, she was even more freaked out. She didn't want the kids to know. I asked her why she didn't say anything, and she told me that she didn't want to scare the kids. It wasn't human. The forest beauty hid something primal, something that didn't want us there. I tried to laugh it off, but my skepticism cracked under her certainty. We packed up, the boys quiet, their disappointment overshadowed by fear. After we had showered and dressed, she told the kids that we were going home tonight. They seemed disappointed, but didn't put up too much of a fuss. The drive home was silent, the kids asleep by the mountain's base, the forest's weight lifting as we descended. It was a quiet drive home, and the kids were asleep by the time that we reached the bottom of the mountain. I apologized, guilt heavy for the failed trip. I drove them home and apologized to Belinda for the trip not working out that great. Belinda, brighter away from the mountain, thanked me for trying. She was in brighter spirits now that we were off the mountain, and thanked me so much for the day and for planning such a special weekend for her and the kids and all that. Time healed the fear, and we grew closer. Marrying years later, we ended up seeing each other more and more, and eventually moved in with each other, and we got married this January. We dissected that day, forming theories. Now, after some time has passed, my wife and I have talked this over again, and we have 3 working theories. Teenagers, the old couple, or something else, something ancient in those mountains. 1, it was some pesky teenagers hiding off the trail. 2, that friendly old couple wasn't as friendly as they seemed. Or 3, there's something weird and big up in those mountains, and it likes to throw rocks at hikers. Belinda's convinced it's the 3rd. My wife is set on the fact that it's option 3. I lean toward the couple, but doubt gnaws at me. I'm heading closer toward option 2. I dug into local lore, joking about Bigfoot to ease the tension. I did some research, though, and told her that if it was a Bigfoot creature, she should have smelled it, and that the smelliest thing out there was her feet. But Lamington's history is heavy. Tales of a presence, a guardian of the forest, territorial and unseen. In conclusion, we usually choose the beach over bushwalks now, regardless of whether it was people or unknown cryptids. The park was my sanctuary, now tainted. It kind of spoiled the fun of taking my family out for hikes in one of my favorite places in the world. I might return alone, but I'll be watching. I might go back one day, probably just by myself. I've done those hikes countless times before with no issues. But you best believe that I'm going to be keeping a very good lookout for big, hairy mountain men. The incident scarred us, and the land itself. The lodge burned down a year later, blamed on reckless kids. Stupid teenagers. Within a year, this burnt the lodge to the ground. By the way, but whispers persist. Hikers report rocks falling, shadows moving, a figure cloaked in forest. Belinda's sighting wasn't unique. Others describe a creature, moss-covered, watching from the trees. The cross circuit is no longer just a trail. It's a warning, a place where the forest fights back, guarding secrets older than the mountains themselves. Years on, I can't shake the feeling that we crossed a line that day. The rocks weren't random, they were a message. Locals talk of the Yowie, a creature tied to the land, protector or predator, depending on the tale. I don't know what Belinda saw, but I know the fear in her eyes was real. The forest didn't want us, and it made sure we knew. If I go back, I'll tread lightly, eyes sharp for what hides in the green, because something in Lamington is awake, and it's not friendly. Story number 13, The Watcher in the Woods. The night was heavy, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every sound sharper. I was curled up on the couch with Mom, the glow of the old tube TV flickering across the room. The sliding glass door behind us opened to the woods, a black void that swallowed the light. I felt it before I saw it, a prickle on my neck, like eyes boring into me from the dark. Someone was out there, watching. The movie's screams faded as my eyelids grew heavy. Mom's arm around me, a fragile shield. But something snapped me awake, a rustle. Too close, too deliberate. My eyes darted to the glass door, its lock glinting faintly. Beyond it, the woods seemed to shift, a shadow moving where none should be. My heart thudded, loud enough to drown out the TVs. Was it my imagination, or was the glass trembling? I nudged Mom. My voice caught in my throat. She stirred, her hand brushing the knife on the coffee table. Then we both saw it, a silhouette, tall and thin, pressed against the glass. Its outline was wrong, jagged, like it didn't belong in this world. The air turned to ice. It wasn't knocking or trying to hide. It was strength, waiting for us to notice. Mom's grip tightened, her breath shallow. The shadow moved, slow and deliberate, its hand scraping the glass with a sound like nails on bone. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't listen. The knife gleamed in Mom's hand, a sliver of defiance against the thing outside. Whatever it was, it knew we were trapped, and it was savoring every second of our fear. Then, with a sickening click, the lock gave way. The door slid open, inch by inch, and the shadow stepped inside. Its face was hidden, but its eyes burned through the dark, locking onto mine. Time stopped. This wasn't a dream or a movie. This was real, and it was here for us. I didn't know if we'd make it through the night. I was 6 years old at the time, living with my parents and brothers in a duplex. The house was an end unit, pressed against a dense stretch of woods that seemed to creep closer at night. We were in an end unit of the duplex and had a sliding glass door in our living room, and it faced the woods. The living room was our sanctuary, with a couch against the wall, half in front of the sliding glass door, but angled in such a way as to see the TV, one of those big old tube TVs with the wood paneling. Life wasn't easy back then. My father would get pretty drunk and was super abusive. His absences were both a relief and a source of dread, leaving us on edge. My mom slept with a knife next to her on nights he stayed out, a kitchen blade that was our only defense. The knife, which was just a kitchen knife, would come into play later. That night, with Dad gone, me and my mom, we camped out on the couch that night. We were watching a horror movie, laughing through the scares, trying to forget the real monsters in our lives. We fell asleep on the couch, Mom with her back to the couch and her cuddling me. The peace didn't last. I awoke to my mom screaming, a sound I knew too well. But this time, it wasn't Dad. A tall, thin man in a black hoodie was standing over us, and it was definitely not my dad. His eyes met mine, cold and unblinking, pinning me in place. My eyes met his, and I was frozen. Mom reacted faster, her instincts kicking in. She grabbed the knife from the coffee table and lunged at him. The man stumbled, caught off guard, then bolted out through the open sliding glass door. My mom jumped up, slammed the door shut, and locked it, and then called the police. The police arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dark. When the police got there, they said that he probably used a knife to pop the lock. They found a ton of cigarette butts scattered outside, none matching my parents' brands. The police said that he was probably sitting out there watching us all night before getting the courage to come in. Worse, they also said that they had several calls of a peeping Tom that matched his description in our complex over recent weeks. Our house was his first break-in, but the thought of him watching us for hours chilled me to the bone. The aftermath was a blur. My parents, they got divorced shortly after this, and we then moved in with my grandma. The move was a relief, a chance to escape the fear that clung to that duplex. I was so thankful for no more encounters like this, but the scars remained. Still to this day, though, I check all the locks before I go to bed twice and have a pole in our sliding glass door as well. Looking out of a window at night, it's still there 'cause it makes me uneasy thinking that someone is out there on the other side watching. Life with Grandma was quieter, but the woods behind that duplex haunted my dreams. I started noticing things, footprints in the yard that didn't match anyone's shoes, scratches on the glass door of our new place that appeared overnight. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I wasn't sure. The police never caught the man, and the reports of the peeping Tom stopped after we left. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he didn't. Years later, I went back to the duplex, now abandoned and overgrown. The sliding glass door was still there, its frame rusted. The glass cracked. I stood where he'd stood, looking in, and felt that same prickle on my neck. The woods were silent, but they weren't empty. I could feel it, eyes in the dark, watching, waiting. I haven't been back since. I started researching the area, digging into old police reports and local stories. The complex had a history, break-ins, disappearances, whispers of a figure seen in the woods. Some called him a drifter, others something worse. A neighbor once told me about a man who'd lived nearby, obsessed with watching families, studying their routines. He'd vanished around the time we left, leaving behind a shack filled with photos, some of people sleeping in their homes. The police dismissed it as coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling he'd been the one. Now, I live in a house with no glass doors, no windows facing the woods, but every night I check the locks, run my hand along the curtains, and listen for sounds that don't belong. The fear never left me. It's part of me, like a shadow I can't outrun. Whoever he was, he taught me one thing. The real monsters don't need masks or claws. They just need patience and a window to watch through. Story number 14, The Unseen Guest. The silence in my apartment wasn't right. It was heavy, like a weight pressing down, waiting for me to notice. I'd lived alone for months, comfortable in my one-bedroom sanctuary, but that night something shifted. The air turned sharp, alive, and I woke to a sound, 3 hard knocks on my bedroom door. They weren't random, not a creak of the building. They were deliberate, like someone demanding I answer. I lay frozen, heart pounding, telling myself it was a dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I'd always been sensitive to things, odd things, since I was a kid. Shadows that moved wrong, whispers in empty rooms. But this was different. My apartment, my safe place, felt like it was watching me. The knocks came again, louder. And I clutched the blanket, staring at the door I'd started locking at night. It wasn't just the sound, it was the intent behind it. Like whatever was out there wanted me to know it was there. The next morning, I laughed it off, blaming my nightmares. I'd had them forever, dark but manageable. But when I tapped my bedroom door, the sound was identical. 3 sharp raps echoing in my skull. I called my sister, half joking, but her voice tightened when I described it. "That's not normal," she said. I didn't want to believe her, but the feeling lingered, like eyes on my back. That night, I left the lights on, the doors cracked, anything to keep the dark at bay. Weeks passed, and the knocks didn't stop. They moved, bedroom, bathroom, front door, always 3, always at night. A friend stayed over once, and he heard them too, his face pale as he stared at the front door. I wasn't imagining it. Then came the voice, small and clear, like my daughter's when she was younger. "Mom," it said, right beside my bed. "My daughter's lives with her dad." It wasn't her. I told myself it was my mind, but my body knew better. It was real. The apartment wasn't mine anymore. Scratches clawed across my heater, sharp and metallic. While I lay awake, a sulfur stench hit me one night. So thick, I gagged and fled the room. I didn't sleep after that, not really. The knocks, the voice, the smells, they were pieces of something bigger, something that wanted me to break. I wasn't just scared, I was unraveling, and whatever was in my home knew it. I moved into my apartment in September of 20. I have always felt comfortable and calm in my home. It was my refuge, a small 1-bedroom where I could breathe away from the chaos of the world. It's important to note that I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. I dealt with nightmares my whole life, but they were familiar, like old scars. And besides my usual nightmares, always had them. Generally not too scary. Everything was pretty good. But then the calm broke. The first time something happened, I was sound asleep and was awoken to 3 knocks on my bedroom door. They cut through the silence, precise and heavy. I usually slept with the bedroom door open and just started closing it at night. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the mind. I just told myself that I'd imagined it. The knocks became a ritual, a taunting rhythm that followed me from room to room. Over the next few months, I heard 3 knocks at my bedroom door, bathroom, or front door. My friend visiting heard them too, his eyes wide as he whispered, "What was that?" I even had a friend visit in March, and he was awoken to 3 knocks at the front door. Then came the voice, soft and heartbreaking. It was around this time, the first time, that I heard my daughter's 7 to 8-year-old voice say, "Mom," next to my bed. And then a couple of weeks later, behind me, at the head of my bed. My daughter wasn't there, hadn't been for years. My daughter is 12 and lives full-time with her dad. So I knew and told myself that that was not my daughter. The apartment turned hostile. I also experienced what sounded like claw scratches across my stand-up heater, across each metal section. The sound was deliberate, like nails on a chalkboard, dragging through the night. Another time I was in bed, and for a couple of seconds I smelt sulfur next to my bed and got up and left my bedroom. The stench was choking, unnatural, gone as fast as it came. I couldn't ignore it anymore. After this, I took my first actions. I reached out to a tarot reader I trusted, someone I'd found online. So, I have a favorite tarot reader or psychic that I found a popular social media app. He and his followers suggested sage, but my building smoke alarms wouldn't allow it. Him and a few people suggested burning sage. I couldn't do this, though, because it would set off the smoke alarms in the building. They offered another way: sage wax melts, loud claps to stir the air, and an open window to let the energy out. The next thing that they suggested using sage incense, making loud claps all over the apartment, in the nooks and the crannies, to break up the energy and get it moving throughout the apartment. Lastly, to open a window and ask whatever or whoever is there to please leave through that designated window. I found Po Santo wax melts at the store, set up a warmer, and followed their advice. I couldn't find sage incense at Walmart, so I got a plug-in wax warmer and picked up Po Santo sage melts. I went home and I did the ritual, and surprisingly enough, I didn't have disturbances for like 3 weeks after this. The apartment felt lighter, like I could breathe again. During this time, I started leaving the bathroom light on with the door cracked, the bedroom door cracked, that is, and the kitchen light on in the kitchen every night. But the peace didn't last. One night, a new sound woke me, a sharp wooden thud, like a staff striking the floor beside my air mattress. I was woken up to the sound of like a wooden pop hitting the floor like a staff, or the wooden end of a broomstick next to my bed. I pulled my hat over my eyes, pretending to sleep, but my body was screaming to run. I had my hat over my eyes and told myself to stay calm and roll over to pretend like I just went back to sleep. The sound came again, closer, with a vibration I felt through the floor. A few minutes pass and I hear it again, and this time I feel the vibration on the floor. I sleep on an air mattress on the floor. By the way, it kept coming relentless, until I couldn't take it. I jump up and say, "What the heck is this?" and dash to my living room, grab my purse, shoes, and leave my phone. I fled to my ex-fiance's, sleeping on his couch, too scared to go back. I slept over at my ex-fiance's that night on the couch because I was too scared to go back. When I returned, the sound followed, loud cracks, like the building itself was protesting. I start hearing a loud wooden pop noise like when a house settles, but live in a concrete building and I'd never heard it before. They echoed through the bedroom, kitchen, bathroom every few minutes. I kept hearing the loud crack or pop noise in the bedroom, kitchen, bathroom every 5 or 10 minutes for around 2 hours. I slept in a chair, too nervous for the bed, but the noises didn't stop. Eventually, I fell asleep on my chair because I was nervous about sleeping in my bedroom again. The final straw came during a nap. A sharp sound like a finger flicking an air mattress jolted me awake. I was awoken at about 9 o'clock to what sounded like a loud flick against the air mattress, and I felt it. It happened again and again, the mattress shifting under me. I was woken up to the loud flick of the air mattress twice, then was awake and heard it again like flick and air mattress moved even. I grabbed my things and ran, hearing the sound even in the bathroom. I packed up, went to the bathroom, and I heard the same sound of the air mattress moving. I drove to my dad's, an hour and a half away, desperate for escape. Got in my car, and I drove to my dad's an hour and a half away. I told everyone, friends, sister, the dad, my therapist. I've told this to all of my friends, sister, and dad every step of the way. And yesterday, my therapist and peer support in detail as well. The fear was a living thing clawing at my heart. And to be honest, I'm very nervous about being back at my apartment again. I have so much fear in my heart. I checked with my landlord. No deaths in the apartment. I checked with my apartment manager today, and nobody has died in my apartment in the past. I called a priest, left a voicemail, hoping for help. I called a local Catholic church and left a voicemail with a priest to call me for guidance and hopefully meet up and discuss coming to my apartment with me. I'd never been religious, but I was desperate. I've always been non-religious. But now, I am open to anything at this point. The worst wasn't the sounds or the voice. It was the thoughts. Dark, twisted things that invaded my mind when the disturbances peaked. It's worth noting, too, that I was having horrible, disgusting, wicked thoughts that were so bad that I can't tell anyone what they were because I don't want to be arrested when the disturbances started escalating. They weren't mine, but they felt real, like something was planting them, trying to break me. I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was fighting for my mind. The apartment was no longer a refuge. Every door, every shadow held a threat. I stayed at my dad's, avoiding the inevitable return. The priest hadn't called back, but I clung to the idea of his help, of any help. My sister suggested moving, but this was my home, my life. I'd fought too hard to build it. Yet the thought of going back made my stomach churn like stepping into a trap I couldn't see. I still hear it sometimes in my dreams. The 3 knocks, the voice, the thud of wood on the floor. My apartment is waiting, but so is something else. It's not a ghost, not a spirit, not anything I can name. It's a presence, patient and hungry, and it knows my name. I don't know if I'll go back, don't know if I can, but one thing's clear, whatever's in that apartment isn't done with me. Story number 5, The Glowing Stranger. The rain didn't just fall, it whispered secrets, as if the woods themselves were speaking. Our house, a sprawling relic in the Ohio wilderness, stood alone, swallowed by trees that seemed to guard it from the world. My grandmother's death had left a void in its walls, her absence a weight I felt in every creak of the floorboards. So it was just me and my dad. I lived downstairs in what felt like my own world, while Dad kept to the upstairs, his TV a constant hum against the silence. But that night, the silence broke, and something else took its place. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet earth, and as I stepped onto the patio, I stepped out onto the concrete patio. I wasn't one for civilized habits. Nature was closer than the bathroom, and the rain didn't bother me. But as I stood there, a blinding yellow glow erupted from the right, like a spotlight burning through the dusk. It wasn't a flashlight. It was wrong. Too warm, too alive. A bright yellow light engulfed my field of view. I froze, heart pounding, and called out, half laughing, half scared. Naturally, I yelled, "Yo, Dad, I'm peeing. What are you doing?" No answer came, no chuckle, no familiar teasy. The light moved, retreating into the shadows, and I stumbled back inside, pulse racing. Was it Dad playing a prank? I walked back inside, thinking it was my dad being weird or something, but doubt crept in. Dad never went out in the rain, never wandered the empty patio. I climbed the stairs, my voice shaky. "Were you outside just now?" And he responded with, "No." The house felt different after that, like it was holding its breath. This has been bothering me for years, on top of many other unexplainable things that went on at that house. I tried to shake it off, but the memory of that light clung to me. A question with no answer. What was out there, and why had it chosen me? I started noticing things, faint scratches on the patio door, too high for an animal, and a strange warmth in the air where the light had been, like something had lingered. Days turned to weeks, but the unease grew. I found an old photo of my grandmother in a drawer, her eyes seeming to follow me, and beside it, a small, tarnished locket I'd never seen before. It wasn't hers, or was it? Had she left something behind, something tied to that light? I started sleeping with the curtains drawn, avoiding the patio, but the woods outside seemed to watch me, their shadows deeper than they should be. There's really nothing to do over there. It's just a big empty space. One night I heard it, a soft hum like a voice caught in the wind coming from the patio. I didn't look, didn't dare, but the air grew warm again and the glass door rattled in its frame. I checked the locks obsessively, but the feeling of being seen never left. I dug into X, searching for stories of lights in the Ohio woods. There were kills, glowing figures tied to old tragedies, to people who'd vanished without a trace. Was it her or something else, something older, using her memory to draw me out? Years later, I moved away, but the house stayed with me. I found a journal entry from my grandmother tucked in a box of her things, mentioning a yellow star she'd seen in the woods, something she swore had spoken her name. Was that what I'd seen? Or had the house itself become a trap, holding on to her and me both? I don't know, but I've never gone back. This one, though, it definitely disturbs me the most. Story number 16, The Pale Stalkers. The night didn't belong to me, it belonged to them. The streets of rural Iowa were quiet, save for the soft patter of my dog's paws as we walked. Finn, my steady companion, led me toward the park, a place where the ordinary often turns strange. I normally walk Finn toward the park where I've had these sorts of experiences. The air was cool, the stars sharp, but a prickle of unease ran down my spine. Something was waiting, and it wasn't human. Kshut! The hounds knew before I did. I saw 3 or 4 deer calmly walking toward the park. They moved with purpose, glancing back as if beckoning me to follow. More joined them, a silent herd, their eyes glinting in the dark. Was this normal, or were they leading me somewhere I shouldn't go? They all start walking together calmly, but still looking back at me every few feet. I pressed on, Finn's leash taut, but a foul stench hit me. Rotting meat, thick and choking. I then smelled the stench of just rotting meat. My skin crawled as the air turned cold, Finn's fur bristling. Finn's hair also stands up, and he begins to get more nervous. I scanned the shadows, and in an alley, I saw it, a blur of pale, muscular flesh, moving too fast to track. It wasn't a deer, wasn't anything I knew. A large, muscular, pale, hairless creature that was moving fast was now in my view. I tried to dismiss it, but Finn's low growl told me I wasn't imagining things. The park felt like a trap, and we were already inside. At the tree line, a lone deer stood apart, staring, unmoving, like a statue carved from the dark. A lone deer separate from the large group across the street, staring directly at me. I aimed my flashlight, but it didn't flinch, didn't breathe. Finn yanked hard, nearly pulling me over. I glanced at the herd, then back, and the lone deer was closer, impossibly closer, still frozen. It wasn't a deer. It was something else, wearing a deer's shape. And in those 3 seconds, that lone deer is easily 30 feet closer to me, still not moving, staring directly at me. I backed away, heart hammering, and fled home, the sense of being hunted clinging to me. The whole way home, I feel like I'm being stalked, though I tried to laugh it off, joking with my wife as I walked Booger later. But in the alley, I saw them, 2 pale, hairless figures, moving slow, their eyes locked on mine. They weren't animals, they were deliberate, predatory. What I saw were 2 large, muscular, pale, hairless creatures walking like apes at the end of the alley. A third appeared, meandering, staring. I then see a third one, slowly sort of meandering across the street, staring at me. Booger growled, and I ran, locking myself in the garage. Booger noticed him too and started growling. That night, Finn guarded the door, Booger the windows, their vigilance a warning. Finn, he just sat at that bedroom door, seemingly guarding it. I found marks the next day, deep gouges in the alley's dirt, too wide for any animal I knew. Had they been tracking me? Or was I just prey that got away? I scoured X for answers, finding stories of pale creatures in Iowa's back roads, tied to old mines and forgotten places. Were they guarding something or hunting me? I don't walk at night anymore. Story number 6, The Gray at the Corner. The apartment was a cocoon of dim light and humming electronics, its walls too thin to hold back the world outside. Sam, a 8-year-old coder, sat hunched over his flickering gaming PC, the glow casting shadows that danced like ghosts. A text from his roommate, Kyle, buzzed his phone. Heading to work. 5 minutes later, Sam stretched, his coffee mug empty, and shuffled toward the kitchen. The hallway felt narrower than usual, the air heavy with an unspoken presence. I leave my room and I'm coming down the hall toward the kitchen and the entrance to my place when I see a shadow being cast onto the rug at the entrance from someone standing in my kitchen. The clatter of silverware stopped him cold, forks, knives, shifting as if someone rummaged through the drawer. I even hear someone moving around the silverware, forks, butter knives, that kind of thing. Sam's first thought was Kyle, lingering for a snack. My first thought was my roommate hasn't left just yet. "Hey, man, you still here?" he called, stepping forward. And I say, "Hey, man, you still here?" and continue walking towards the kitchen in the entrance. A faint chain-like rattle and a low hum vibrated through the air, unsettlingly out of place. The whole time there's sounds of like a chain jingling and a buzzing sound, sort of. Sam rounded the corner, expecting Kyle's familiar slouch. I round the corner expecting to see him, but when I do, no one is in my kitchen. The kitchen was empty, the drawer untouched, the silence deafening. His heart thudded, the emptiness more alarming than any presence. He thought of his dog, Bella, who roamed free with her harness. So, my second thought is that it must have been my dog. It roams free in the apartment and has its harness on. Maybe her tags had clinked, mimicking the sound. So maybe it was shaking clothes. But Bella didn't appear, and the kitchen remained still. Sam's confusion deepened, his brow furrowing. With furrowed eyebrows and a confused frown on my face, I lean in to look out of the peephole on the door to see what's going on outside of my apartment door. He pressed his eye to the peephole, expecting a neighbor or delivery. I don't see anyone, though, so I assume it's something happening out of view out there. The chain-like sound persisted, now joined by heavy footsteps, as if a large animal prowled outside. And I still hear the jingling chain in the footsteps, almost like someone was walking a large dog past my front door. "Oh, turkey," he shrugged, trying to dismiss the unease, and I just sort of shrugged my shoulders and like, "Oh well, right." But as he turned, the world tilted. A figure leaned around the corner, its 3-fingered hand grazing the wall, its form wispy, like smoke caught in moonlight. I turn around and am immediately faced with what I'm going to describe as a gray leaning around the corner with one 3-fingered hand touching the wall. The gray's presence was a violation of reality, its body shimmering as if woven from fog. It looks insubstantial, but like it's made of smoke or fog. Sam's breath caught, his body frozen as the figure's almond-shaped eyes, black and endless, met his. I gasp and take a step back, and it ducks back around the corner without a sound. It vanished, leaving only the hum in the air. Sam's voice trembled as he spoke to the empty room. I start saying things like, "It's okay. You can come out. I won't hurt you. And I'm sorry. You just startled me." No reply came, only silence that felt alive. He approached the corner, his pulse racing. I go up and inspect the corner where I saw it. The space was impossibly narrow, barely 4 inches between the wall and the TV, and there isn't enough room for someone to stand there and peek around, much less to hide from someone coming into the apartment. There's like 4 in of clearance between the edge and the TV. No one could fit there, not even a child. So unless someone was like 2 in wide, they just wouldn't fit there. The realization hit like a cold wave. This was no human. Sam's mind reeled, grasping for explanations. And look, I know as well as you that it sounds crazy as heck, but I swear that it's the truth of what happened. Stress, a hallucination. Maybe it's stress and I hallucinated it. Completely possible. He'd been burning out. His coding job relentless. But this felt too vivid. Maybe I'm actually sick and need medication for some kind of chemical imbalance. The thought of schizophrenia gnawed at him, though he dreaded the label. I mean, I don't want to be a schizophrenic, but it's possible, right? The apartment seemed to watch him, its corners sharper, its shadows deeper. And yes, before you ask, before that and every single night since, I see things out of the corner of my eye. Fleeting shapes, gone when he turned, had plagued him for weeks. But when I turn to look, there's nothing there. Yet he felt no fear, only curiosity tinged with dread. Not once have I felt threatened or afraid. Was this a glimpse into something beyond or a crack in his own mind? Sam replayed the moment. The gray's ethereal form burned into his memory. I remember watching this YouTube video about lizard people having wardrobe malfunctions on live TV. He'd laughed at the conspiracy theories, dismissing them as entertainment. I know it's probably all bunk, but I enjoy a good conspiracy theory as much as the next guy. But now, the absurdity felt less distant. It's entertainment, but I really just don't want to be the crazy guy. He hadn't been thinking of aliens when it happened. He'd been mundane, craving coffee. I watched this video and honestly didn't have a single thing on my mind when the encounter began. He shared his story online, bracing for skepticism. I figure that I'm probably going to get a bunch of people probably doubting things and saying hateful stuff, and I can't help that or how I feel. Comments ranged from ridicule to eerie corroborations. Others had seen grays, fleeting and silent, in their homes. One user mentioned the apartment building's history, a fire in the 80s, whispers of experiments in the basement. Sam scoffed, but couldn't shake the unease. Was the gray tied to this place, or to him? He began noticing patterns. The hum returned nightly, faint but persistent, like a signal. Bella grew restless, staring at corners where nothing stood. Sam installed a camera, but it caught only static, as if the gray defied capture. He researched grays, folklore, abduction tales, scientific debunkings. Some claimed they were interdimensional, slipping through reality's seams. The idea felt less crazy now. The apartment, a liminal space where the impossible lingered. Sam's life became a balancing act. He coded by day, hunted answers by night. The gray didn't reappear, but its absence was as unsettling as its presence. He wondered if he'd invited it by noticing, if his curiosity had opened a door. The apartment's walls seemed to pulse, holding secrets they wouldn't share. The only thing that I can do is just try to be honest with the world and with myself. Sam swore to keep searching, even if the truth broke him. I may be cracking it, who knows? But this is what happened. I swear on it. Weeks later, Sam found a journal in the apartment's storage closet, its pages brittle. It belonged to a tenant from decades ago, detailing visitors who appeared at night, formless yet watching. The writer had fled, warning others to avoid the building. Sam's skin prickled. The gray wasn't new. He contacted the landlord, who dismissed the journal as fiction, but admitted the basement was sealed for safety. What lay beneath? Sam wondered. And why did it call to him? He began sleeping with the lights on, Bella curled close. The shadows still moved, but he stopped chasing them. A co-worker, noticing his fatigue, shared a story of a ghost in her childhood home, a figure that vanished when named. Sam tried it, whispering gray to the empty apartment. The hum stopped for a night, but returned stronger, as if provoked. He wasn't alone anymore, and the realization was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Sam's story spread online, drawing a small following. Some called him delusional. Others sent tips, crystals, sage, EMF detectors. He tried them all, but the gray's trace lingered, a shadow in his peripheral vision. He vowed to stay, to understand. The apartment was no longer just a home. It was a puzzle, a challenge. Sam didn't know if he was cracking or awakening, but he'd face the gray again, on his terms. Story number 18, The Phantom Tale. Picture a highway carved through mountains, where cliffs loom like silent giants and the night swallows all light. At 18, I was no stranger to the isolation of our rural town. But that night, driving home with my mom, I felt the darkness press against us. We'd just left a midnight movie in the city, stopping at a bustling truck stop to fill gas and grab drinks for the 50-mile trek. The station was alive with truckers and travelers, a beacon in the void. As we pulled out, I noticed a dingy Jeep leave at the same time, its rusted frame barely visible in the glow of neon signs. It didn't seem odd. People came and went constantly. But as we merged onto the pitch-black highway, the Jeep kept a steady pace behind us. My stomach tightened. The road was empty, flanked by jagged cliffs and sparse fields. No houses, no lights, just us and that Jeep, trailing like a shadow we couldn't shake in. The Jeep's headlights flickered in our rear-view mirror, too close for comfort. Mom gripped the wheel, her knuckles pale. Then it roared past us, vanishing over a hill. We laughed it off. Locals often sped at 100 mph on these roads, reckless but familiar. But soon we came upon the Jeep again, pulled over, its back half blocking the lane. A man's arm waved from the window, gesturing for us to stop. My heart lurched. We sped by, refusing to slow. The Jeep gunned its engine, overtaking us again, only to pull over once more, repeating the eerie signal. This happened the third time, and Mom and I grew nervous. He flew up and began tailgating us, so close we couldn't see his headlights, waving for us to pull over. I clutched a pocket knife, my voice breaking as I begged Mom not to stop. The highway was a dead zone, no service, no help. Images from horror movies like Rest Stop flooded my mind, picturing us stranded or worse. 30 minutes of terror stretched like hours. The Jeep's driver leaned on his horn, the sound sharp and mocking in the silent night. He drove so aggressively, Mom was white-knuckling the wheel. I stared at the knife in my hand, its blade useless against the growing dread. Then, as suddenly as it began, the Jeep slammed on its brakes, turned, and disappeared back toward the city. The silence that followed was worse than the chase. We drove home in eerie quiet, and I slept in Mom's room, too scared to be alone. My mind raced with questions. Why us? What did he want? The mountains seemed to hold the answer, their shadows whispering secrets. The next morning, we concluded he'd seen 2 women alone and thought we'd be easy targets. Some claimed he was a good Samaritan, chasing us over dropped money. I thought that was ridiculous. Nobody with good intentions follows like that. The days after were heavy with unease. We reported the incident to the sheriff, but with no license plate or clear description, they could do little. I started noticing things. Tire tracks near our driveway, a strange hum in the air at night. Our town was small, the kind where everyone knew everyone, yet no one recognized that Jeep. I dug into local stories, desperate for answers. Old-timers spoke of a drifter who'd haunted the highway decades ago, a man who'd lured travelers to the cliffs, robbing them or worse. He died in a crash, they said, but his presence lingered, drawn to lone drivers. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the way that Jeep vanished felt wrong, like it melted into the night itself. Mom and I avoided late drives after that, sticking to daylight, but the fear clung to me, a weight I couldn't shake. Months later, just before we moved, I heard a rumor that chilled me. The same Jeep was reported following a group of 4 men on their way to work. They'd been shaken, but unharmed, describing the same aggressive tailing. Was it a prankster, a predator, or something else? I tracked down a local historian who shared a tale about the highway's construction in the night. Workers had found strange artifacts, bones, carved stones buried under the cliffs. The land was sacred, she said, and disturbing it had awakened something. I thought of the Jeep's driver, his arm waving like a signal from another time. When we left town, I looked back at the highway one last time. The cliffs stood tilted, but I felt eyes on us, watching from the dark. That night taught me the road holds secrets, and some shadows don't let go. Story number 9, The Yellow-Eyed Shadow. The forest was a cathedral of darkness, its ancient trees swallowing the weak glow of our truck's headlights. At 20, I was on a slow, meandering journey through Normandy with Claude, a grizzled 55-year-old friend who knew every back road like the lines on his hands. Our old truck coughed along at a snail's pace, its engine groaning under the weight of decades. We were explorers of the forgotten, drawn to crumbling churches and abandoned bunkers, but nothing prepared us for what waited in those woods. The night was heavy, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. Somewhere in that endless black, something was watching. And then, in the flicker of our failing lights, we saw it. The outline was wrong, too sharp, too human, yet not human at all. I saw some very black humanoid outlines on the left side of the road. It was a very clear outline too, because it was the light of the truck that sort of outlined it. It stood on two legs, tall and thin, its body cloaked in coarse black hair that seemed to drink in the light. But the creature was on two legs as a biped would walk, no tail. My breath caught in my throat as its head turned, slow and deliberate, pinning us with eyes like twin moons. It had huge yellow eyes, a bit like an owl. Claude's hands tightened on the wheel, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any scream. Every instinct screamed to floor it, but our truck could barely muster 30 kilometers an hour. We inched closer, the creature's gaze never wavering. As we were slowly approaching the creature, though, I saw it turning its head in our direction. Its eyes held an intelligence that chilled me, not animal, but something ancient, knowing. I imagined opening the door, its long arms snatching me into the dark. I saw its arms sort of swinging along its thin, black, hairy body. It had hair all over its body as well. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the creature stepped onto the road. Its movements fluid yet unnatural. It was crossing our path, daring us to come closer. We slowly drove in its direction, and it started to cross the road as it was staring at us. My heart pounded so loud I thought Claude could hear it. We almost were at its level, and I remember fearing that if I opened my truck door, that it would probably grab me. The creature paused on the other side, turning to face us fully, its yellow eyes burning through the night. It arrived on the other side of the road and suddenly stopped, turned in our direction, still staring at me or us. I glanced at the rearview mirror, unable to look away. I didn't move my head, just looking at the right rearview mirror, seeing that it was still staring at our truck, letting us drive away from it. The forest swallowed the creature as we drove on, but its presence lingered, heavy and oppressive. My friend and I didn't say a word, and maybe about half an hour later, we drive out of the dark woods. I broke the silence first, my voice shaky. I said something like, "Well, weird things do happen in the woods." Claude's hands trembled on the wheel. My friend was suddenly extremely nervous, saying, "Yeah, did you see that? What the heck was that?" We talked about it, and he saw the same thing as me. He couldn't shake the memory of those eyes, how they seemed to see through him, into him. He is particularly marked by the intelligence in its big yellow eyes. That night changed us. We reached our destination, a friend's house, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of the creature haunted me. Its silhouette burned into my mind. I'm an urbexer since like 2004. I visited the catacombs of Paris every few months. I saw weird stuff during my explorations, but I've never feared anything like this. I'd explored dark places, faced strange sights, but nothing carried the weight of that encounter. Years later, I found a drawing online, a near-perfect match, save for the eyes. One day, I actually found a picture on the internet. Sadly, I didn't find the artist, and there was no context. But whatever it was, it looked a lot like what we saw that night, except for the eyes. The creature that I saw had big, round, yellow eyes, but apart from that, it was pretty much the spitting image. Claude and I still talk about it. Our voices hushed even now. Today, he's in his 60s, and I'm in my 30s, and we are both still really haunted by whatever this thing was. We talk about it every time that we meet each other. The forest had shown us something beyond explanation, something that didn't belong in our world. But the real terror wasn't just what we saw, it was the feeling it left behind. The sense that it knew us, that it could find us again. I stopped exploring remote woods after that, sticking to city ruins where the shadows felt safer. Yet every time I close my eyes, I see those yellow orbs, watching, waiting, somewhere or in the dark. Story number 20, The Van in the Rain. The beach was a maze of laughter and waves, but for a 7-year-old, it was a world too big to navigate. I was 6, maybe 7, on a family trip to Florida's sun-soaked coast in the mid-90s. Our rented beach house stood just steps from the sand, its white paint chipped from years of salt and wind. Mom told me to stay close, but the ocean's pull was stronger than her words. I wandered, chasing gulls and collecting shells, until the crowd thinned and the houses all looked the same. Panic crept in as I realized I was lost. Then the sky darkened, and the rain began to fall. The drops stung my face, cold and sharp, driving me to find shelter. I wandered way down, and before I knew it, I was lost. A lot of the houses looked the same, and I really wasn't sure which one was ours. I followed a path I thought led home, but it spilled into an empty parking lot, gray and slick with rain. There was a big, dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle around. A hulking shape loomed in the lot, its windows fogged, its paint peeling like old skin. I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair, a hot pink tank top, and those sort of big, clunky, thick glasses that were popular in the 80s, waving and smiling at me from the passenger seat of the van. Her voice was syrupy sweet, cutting through the rain's hiss. She said something like, "Oh my, it's raining. Where's your mommy? Let us take care of you. It's dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could get struck by lightning." She leaned out, her smile white but unsteady, like a mask that didn't fit. In the driver's seat was a very overweight man without a shirt on, a hairy gray chest and some clunky-looking gold chain. His yellow-tinted Elvis shades glinted as he stared, unblinking. He was smoking a cigarette, which I knew was bad. Something about his eyes made my stomach twist, like he was hungry for something I couldn't name. I stood frozen, clutching my soggy sneakers. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down to me. She asked me how old I was. When I told her, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We've got movies, Nintendo, and in the morning we've got all types of cereal." Her words were a lure, painting a picture of fun and warmth. The lady continued talking about stuff like how the boys have go-karts and that they like to drink chocolate milk. I wanted to believe her. My friends back home had Nintendo, and I loved chocolate milk. But Mom's warnings about strangers echoed in my head, faint but persistent. I took a step toward the van, rain soaking my shirt. I told her this, and she told me that that was no problem, that they lived just up the road. My mom shouldn't mind. It started raining harder, and she opened the sliding door of the van and said something like, "Let's get you out of this rain and go find your mommy." The van's door yawned open, dark and cavernous. Then it hit me, a stench so foul it burned my nose, like rotting food and smoke. As I walked toward the open door of the van, I noticed an awful stench that almost made me gag. There were cigarette butts all over the floor. My heart raced as I peered inside, seeing shadows of clutter and something that felt wrong. The man's stare grew heavier, his toothy grin showing stained yellow teeth. I looked up at the fat man who was not only staring at me with this menacing glare, but he had this really creepy sort of toothy smell, and his teeth were stained a really dark yellow. Every lesson about stranger danger screamed in my mind. I knew now that I should run, but the woman was ushering me to hurry up and get in. Her voice turned sharp, her smile gone. She sounded angry and said, "Get in already." Her hand reached for me, fingers brushing my arm. The woman managed to grab my arm or wrist, but somehow I was able to quickly break free and run back to the beach. I bolted, my small legs pumping through the rain, sand kicking up behind me. I didn't look back, not even when I heard her shout. The beach stretched before me, a blur of gray and blue. I found Mom, her face pale with worry, searching the shore. I made it back to my mom, who was freaking out. I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a jumble, but I couldn't make her see how close I'd come to something terrible. I tried to explain what had happened to me, but I just don't think that at 7 years old, I was able to convey the gravity of what had actually happened to me. Needless to say, my mom never let me out of her view again after that. The rest of the trip was a haze. Mom kept me close, her hand gripping mine like a lifeline. The beach house felt less safe, its windows too open to the dark. I never saw the van again, but I dreamed of it, those yellow shades, that rancid smell, the woman's voice turning cold. Years later, I learned about cases of missing kids, stories that made my skin crawl. I wondered if I'd brushed against something like that, a trap set for a kid too young to know better. The rain still makes me uneasy, and I can't shake the feeling that I escaped something far worse than a storm. Story number 21, The 7 Souls. I was 15, too young to know what love should be, too broken to see the cage I'd walked into. My first girlfriend, a year older, was my world, bright, magnetic, and dangerous. We'd been together in secret for 2 years, stealing moments in school hallways and quiet corners. When we went public, something in her shifted, like a switch flipped to reveal a darkness I hadn't seen. We had just gone public and came out to our parents officially. At the time, I was 15 and she was 16, if memory serves. Her laughter turned sharp, her touch heavy with intent. She was really abusive throughout our entire relationship, and I, caught in the wreckage of my parents' divorce, didn't know how to escape. Her name was Lily, but she wasn't just Lily anymore. She had recently, within about 5 months leading up to this, told me that she had 7 souls living within her, all of which hated me. She claimed they were men from another era, Victorian ghosts who'd taken root in her mind. They were all men from Victorian era or something. Each had a name, a voice, a way of breaking me. I'm going to give them aliases, as this should help with understanding it all, even though they're not real. Juke, she said, choked me in my sleep. Harold's fists left bruises. Han wielded knives in the dark. Juke liked to choke me in my sleep. Harold hit me. Han would try to cut me with knives when I was sleeping. I'd wake to her staring, unblinking, claiming it wasn't her. I just got out of an extremely abusive relationship, so I had a hard time recognizing the danger that I was in. The worst was Alex, the one who haunted our final months. But Alex was the worst and the entity that I had to deal with the most towards the end. He was cruel, calculating, his presence like a cold blade against my skin. He'd play paranormal activity and torment me with the creepiest stuff that you'd ever seen. Lily would sit in the corner of her room, humming, her eyes glinting with malice. He would sing in the corner of the room in the dark. He would smile at me while saying things like, "You'll die soon." I believed her when she said Alex would kill me if I left. He also convinced me that if I ever left him that he would kill me. I was 15 and I believed it. Her house was my refuge, or so I thought. My parents had just freshly divorced and custody was being settled. My home was chaos. So I spent weekends at Lily's, where her parents saw only her charming side. Whenever their parents were around, they'd just snap out of it, literally like a light switch. She could turn the madness on and off, a performance so flawless I doubted my own sanity. This is also where my hesitancy comes in with the legitimacy of their psychosis. Was she sick, or was this deliberate cruelty? I guess I'm hesitant to attribute her behavior solely to a psychotic breakdown because, quite honestly, I think that she was an evil person. The day it all unraveled started it quietly, too quietly. We were downstairs, Alex, or my girlfriend, and myself watching TV. Lily's parents were gone. Her older sibling upstairs, lost in their own world with soundproof headphones. Upstairs was their older sibling, who was a complete hermit, kept to their room with soundproof headphones on. In fact, I sat at the kitchen table scribbling homework. When I heard it, a low, unsteady hum, I hear Alex start humming in the corner like usual. My skin prickled as I glanced over, seeing her smile too wide, too wrong. I turn around and ask if they're okay, but they do the creepy smile and nod thing. I froze, knowing what came next. She moved to the kitchen, her steps deliberate. They start walking over to the kitchen, still humming, but there was a shake in their voice that I hadn't heard before. I looked up slowly and saw that they were taking a large paring knife out of the knife block. My heart slammed against my ribs, adrenaline flooding my veins. I remember my adrenaline started to kick in, and I looked around for ways to defend myself. To my shock, she turned away, heading for the stairs. I watched them walk down the hallway and towards the stairs before they exclaimed, I'm going to kill you." She wasn't talking to me. She meant her sibling. I presume to their sibling. I don't know what made me move. Something came over me at this point, and before I knew it, I was booking it up the stairs and trying to stop them as they started running, knife in hand, up the stairs. I grabbed her leg, pulling her down. I grabbed their pant leg and pulled them down a few steps. We collapsed in a heap as her sibling's door creaked open. We both collapsed as their sibling opened their bedroom door. Then she turned on me, the knife flashing. Alex at this point turned around and struck me with the knife, leaving a huge gash on my arm and shoulder. Pain seared through me, blood soaking my shirt. I retreated back downstairs as they calmly called out to their sibling, "Nothing, just tripped. I'm okay, thanks." I stumbled to the kitchen, hands shaking as I texted my parents. I ran to the kitchen downstairs, texted my parents to come and get me, and started cleaning and bandaging my arm as best I could. Lily returned, her eyes empty. Alex returned at this point, and as soon as we made eye contact, they dropped the knife, walked into the kitchen, sat on the floor, and started singing to themselves while rocking back and forth. I stared, blood dripping onto the floor, and told her I was done. I stared at them, bloody tissues in hand, and informed them that I was done with all of this and was going to wait outside for my parents. They began crying through the song that they were singing. Still smiling like a maniac, I waited outside, the night air cuzzed against my wound. My parents came, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. A week later, I ended it over the phone. I broke up with them over the phone about a week later. They sobbed and told me that they'd get rid of their souls and that she still loved me. But I didn't listen. I hung up, and she vanished from my life, dropping out of school. She even dropped out of school, which meant that I literally never saw her again after that. Years later, I learned she'd been cheating on me the whole time. A betrayal that stung but didn't surprise. Then found out that she was cheating on me with them for the entire time her and I dated. The scars on my arm faded, but the ones in my mind lingered. Therapy helped me unpack the trauma. Though the memories still cut deep, I've been in therapy for this recently, and I wanted to share it to kind of reflect on it. I learned to spot red flags, to trust my instincts when something feels off. Be careful out there who you date. And if you see red flags, then please take them seriously, because otherwise you'll end up like I did. Lily taught me that monsters don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they smile, hold your hand, and call it love. I rebuilt my life, found safer connections, but I'll never forget the weight of her gaze, the hum of her voice, or the cold steel that marked the end. Story number 2, the shadow over two. You ever walk into a room and feel it hates you? Not the people, not the furniture, but the room itself, its walls, its air, its silence. That's what I felt every time I stepped into T5, a toddler classroom at the daycare where I worked. My name's Sarah, and I'm no stranger to tough days. But T5 was different. It wasn't just the kids or the dim lights. It was something alive, something that watched me. waiting for me to break. I work at a school or daycare, and I swear to you that there's a demon in it, or possibly several. This is the story of how I learned to fear a place I was supposed to call my second home. The first time I felt it, I thought I was imagining things. So, it started with a particular toddler room called T. Since I started working there, I've never liked going in there. I'd been a floater for 6 months, bouncing between classrooms, but T5 always left me cold. The kids were wilder there, sure, but it was more than that, a weight in the air, like the room was holding its breath. I'd stand by the door watching the toddlers nap and feel my skin prickle, as if something was standing just behind me. By the end of my first month, I was dreading every shift in that room, and I didn't know why. Then the noises started. Then I heard something round the corner at the sink. The dishes started clinking like someone was doing the dishes. I was covering for T5's main teacher during nap time. The room dark, except for the glow of a white noise machine. The clinking came from the sink, sharp and deliberate, like someone was stacking plates. I peeked around the corner. Nothing. I sat back down, heart racing, and it started again. That's when I noticed the air felt different, heavier, like it was pressing down on my chest. I looked around the corner, and nothing was there. It didn't stop there. The next time that I was there, the closet door opened by itself. I was alone. The kids asleep. When the door creaked open, revealing only darkness inside, I froze, my mind racing for explanations, a draft, a loose hinge, but deep down, I knew better. During nap time, when the kids are asleep, is always when the thing really acts up in T4. The room seemed to come alive during those quiet hours, as if the silence invited something to stir. I started avoiding tea when I could, but as a floater, I didn't always have a choice. That's when I saw it, and last week, I saw it. It was like a black diamond shape in the air above the shoulder and a little bit behind a teacher standing in the hallway. I was walking past the staff room when I caught it, a shape hovering just behind Mark, one of the teachers. It was a mass of shadow, its edges blurring into the air, with a head like a twisted skull, part bird, part nightmare. The head wasn't really describable, I guess, but the closest thing would be a cross between a vulture skull and a plague doctor mask. I blinked, and it was gone, but the chill it left behind stayed with me for hours. The incidents piled up, each one harder to dismiss. I was getting bad dizzy spells and double vision, but I didn't make the connection that it was only happening at work and only when I was in T5 or adjacent rooms. I'd feel fine at home, but the moment I stepped into T5, my head would spin and my vision would blur. One day, I nearly collapsed. Clutching a table as the room tilted, I started noticing other things too. Sharp pains in my stomach, a crushing sadness that vanished the second I left the building. It was like T5 was draining me, piece by piece. I wasn't the only one. Then another teacher, who I'd become friends with, mentioned offhand that she and her daughter, who also had worked there, had felt like the place had really negative energy. Her name was Lisa, and over coffee, she told me about her own experiences, doors opening, dishes clinking, and a deep, guttural voice that seemed to come from nowhere. I asked her what she saw, and she also described dishes clinking, doors opening, hearing a deep voice speaking from the ceiling, and dizzy spells and other weird health stuff. She'd quit a year ago, and her daughter had too, both citing the darkness of the place. Lisa even mentioned a co-worker who'd suffered 2 miscarriages while working in T5, only to have a healthy pregnancy after leaving. The stories didn't end there. This teacher also told me that the former main teacher of T5 had been into occult stuff. I'd heard rumors about her, Mary Ann, a sharp-tongued woman who'd left shortly after I started. No one liked her, and the whispers about her rituals were hard to ignore. I dug deeper, talking to other staff, and learned that 3 current teachers were into strange practices, posting about tarot and dark symbols online. All 3 also bullied me and another teacher over here for being Christian. Their hostility felt personal, like they knew I sensed something they didn't want me to see. The kids noticed it too. Then one of the almost 2-year-olds pointed to the doorway of the classroom and nervously said, "There's a ghost in there." Her name was Ellie, and she'd stare at the ceiling, her eyes wet before bursting into tears. Other toddlers did the same, their cries piercing the quiet of nap time. She and another child often stare at something towards the ceiling and burst into uncontrollable crying and screaming. I'd try to comfort them, but the air would turn cold, and I'd feel that same watched sensation, like something was circling us. One afternoon, I was in an older classroom watching over a napping group that included a nonverbal autistic boy named Sam. Today, I was supervising napping kiddos in an older classroom. That class has an autistic boy who is not very verbal. Everything was calm until I felt a sudden chill, the kind that makes your breath catch. Then I heard things being scootered around in the bathroom. The sound was soft but unmistakable, something moving in the dark. But the little nonverbal boy suddenly woke up, pointed at something, and absolutely screamed. Sam, who rarely reacted to anything, he was shaking, his finger aimed at the bathroom door. I ran to him, whispering, "It's okay." But my voice trembled. I ran and hugged him and said, "Get out." At the thing, the worst came during a quiet shift in T5. Dishes clink every time once the sink even turned on. I was tidying up when the faucet sputtered to life. Water gushing onto the floor. Then whatever it was started knocking glasses on the floor. The crash woke half the kids, their cries mixing with the clinking dishes. I rushed to shut off the water, but as I reached for the faucet, I felt it, a pressure around my throat, like invisible hands squeezing. Another day, during a nap, I got my air cut off for about 5 seconds, like something had me by the throat. I stumbled back, gasping, and the pressure vanished. The kids were screaming now, and I could barely think. I started keeping a journal, documenting every incident. Shadows moved across the windows at night, too fast to be human. It sounds like claws are tapping on the glass window, happening all the time, and shadow figures glide past the big outside windows. One teacher, Rachel, told me about a bathroom door in her classroom that locked itself despite needing a hard push to close. The other day, another teacher, who I had not talked to about any of this, nervously told me the bathroom door in her classroom closed itself and clicked locked, despite the fact that it scrapes on the floor and has to be pushed really hard to close. She looked shaken, her hands trembling as she spoke. The daycare itself seemed to change. The hallways felt narrower, the lights dimmer. I'd catch glimpses of that black shape again, always near Mark or the other teachers who gave me trouble. It was like the shadow fed off their anger, growing stronger with every cruel word they spoke. My faith, once a comfort, felt like a target. I felt like I was being targeted in fact or attacked. The bullying from the 3 teachers escalated, their taunts laced with a strange intensity, as if they were daring me to fight back. I tried to stay strong, but the toll was heavy. This horrible dark depression comes over me like life is pointless. I close my eyes and see glimpses of knives cutting my skin. At night, I'd wake from dreams of blood and blades, my heart pounding. I'm having night terrors now. Anxiety attacks are increasing just from having to go to work and be around this. I confided in my friend Emily, the only other religious staff member, but she quit soon after, unable to handle the darkness. Prior to this, my work bestie, the only other religious employee, had been the only one to say that she'd seen stuff. She quit shortly after this, too. The breaking point came when I was disciplined for answering a parent's question about the bullying. And I was just told that because I just answered a parent's question honestly. I'm no longer allowed to be a floater. I am to be kept contained in one classroom so that I don't interact with the other staff or expose them to anything else. My boss's words, kept contained, echoed in my mind, cold and deliberate. I felt trapped, not just by the job, but by T5 itself. Every time I walked into that room, I could feel it waiting, its presence thicker, hungrier. I started applying for jobs, desperate to escape. Now, I'm counting the days until I can leave. I'm desperately applying for other jobs as fast as I can, but the memories of T5 linger, the clinking dishes, the shadow with its vulture skull, the screams of the children who saw what I couldn't. I don't know what's in that room, but I know it's real. So, I've gotten enough confirmation about this that I'm convinced now that it's real. Some places are more than just walls and floors. Some places are Alisa, and they don't let you go easily. Story number 23, The Drunkard's Rage. The rain battered Liverpool streets, a gray curtain over a city that felt like it was holding its breath. I was barely out of my teens, stuck in a rundown hotel with my mom, who dragged me to England to chase her grandparents' ghosts. Our agreement was that after spending a week in England, the second week we would spend in Ireland. But her planning was a mess, leaving us stranded in Liverpool, the Irish Sea too wild to cross. 5 days in, I was scrambling for places to sleep, her lack of foresight my burden. The hotel was a mistake. I picked it out of desperation, a crumbling relic with peeling wallpaper and a sour smell of mold. I picked a hotel that seemed okay, and my mom paid to sleep in a different room because she has really bad RLS and shakes violently at night. Her restless legs made sharing a room impossible. So I was alone in a space that felt too small. the walls pressing in like a trap. The night promised rest, but the air was thick with unease, the kind that makes your skin crawl. It started with a shout. A man's voice, slurred and furious, tore through the hallway, followed by fists pounding doors. In the middle of the night, I heard a man yelling in the hallway, though he had to have been very intoxicated. He was pounding on the doors all the way down the hall and hitting the walls. Each bang was closer, rattling my nerves. I was a cocky kid full of bravado and made a fatal error. Being the punk kid that I was, I made the mistake of acknowledging his rage by telling him to shut up. My voice echoed, a challenge I couldn't take back. He turned on me. This really enraged him. He started beating on the door, screaming that he was going to kill me. His threats were a guttural roar, promising blood. He tried the door doorknob, and thank God those doors had an automatic lock. The door shuddered under his fists, wood splintering. I started looking around the room and realized that this hotel has no phones in the room, no lifeline. I went to the window, but I was 3 floors up and windows didn't open either. I was caged, his voice a blade carving through the night. The assault didn't stop. So I just stayed there, listening, as he did his best to break the door down, while threatening what he was going to do to me once he opened the door. Each blow felt personal, the threats graphic, painting horrors I couldn't unhear. I pressed against the far wall, the room shrinking, my pulse a drum in my ears. The hallway fell silent after an eternity, but fear kept me awake, sleep a distant hope. Somehow I finally fell asleep, exhaustion winning over terror. Morning revealed the wreckage, and when I woke up the next morning, I saw just how much damage he had actually done. He smashed in my door with a fire extinguisher that he had apparently pulled off the wall nearby. The door was a ruin, dented and cracked. There were dents and marks all down the hall where he had dragged it violently from end to end. Red paint from the extinguisher streaked the walls, a violent mural. The hallway felt violated, its scars mirroring my own shaken nerves. Checking out was a bitter pill. When I told the clerk as we were checking out, he looked at me like I was crazy and making it up. I told him to just go and look. His shrug was dismissive, like this was just another night in a city that chewed up dreams. My mom's words cut deeper. Later, I asked my mom about it and she said, "Oh, yes, I thought I heard you screaming. Was that you crying for help?" Her casual tone was a betrayal, leaving me to carry the weight of that night alone. My fear dismissed as noise. The hotel faded, but its shadow lingered. Liverpool's streets took on a darker hue, strangers' glances sharper, their steps heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that the city was watching, waiting for another moment of weakness. Years later, I learned the hotel was torn down, its history a whisper of drifters, fights, and worse. That night, I'd brushed against its underbelly, a rage that wasn't just human but born of the place itself, a scar I'd carry long after leaving. Story number 24, the Phantom Pickup. The gym smelled of sweat and old rubber, a chaotic hum of high school noise. I was 14, a scrawny freshman working at a McDonald's in a truck stop where truckers and drifters drifted through like shadows. When I was 14, I worked at a McDonald's that was connected to a gas station. It was a truck stop, basically, so it was very busy 90% of the time. Life was school, shifts, and dodging trouble. But that day, something was wrong. A prickle at the back of my neck like eyes watching from afar. It started with a notification. I was slouched on the gym bleachers, laughing with friends, skipping dodgeball. I was a freshman in high school. At the time, I was pretty small, maybe not in height, but certainly in size. I was around 5'6" and anywhere from like 30 to 150 feet. My school iPad pinged, a Power School alert saying I was excused, Mom picking me up early. I received Power School notifications, my school iPad, excusing me from the remaining classes of the day. Confusion hit. She hadn't mentioned this, and Dad wasn't the type to show up. The gym teacher's voice cut through. She waved me over, saying my mom was at the office. My gym teacher told me that I needed to grab my things and go to the office because my mom would be picking me up. My pulse quickened as I grabbed my bag. I was grounded, so I didn't have a phone with me other than a cheap flip phone that my mom had gotten me from Walmart. I texted her, fingers clumsy, asking if she was coming. Her reply was sharp. Don't leave the building. My stomach sank, the gym's noise fading to a dull roar. Someone was lying. She freaked out, though, and told me not to leave the building. I sat in the office, the window cold against my shoulder, staring at an empty lot. At this point, I was sitting in the office by the window waiting for apparently nobody to come and pick me up until the situation was figured out. My mom called the school, her voice cracking. My mom ended up calling the school and letting them know that I wasn't allowed to leave with anyone that day. Someone had called, claiming to be her, saying they'd pick me up. Apparently, whoever called claiming to be my mom and said that they were coming to pick me up wasn't actually her. No one came. As far as I know, nobody ever showed up to pick me up, and I didn't hear anything else about it. The staff shrugged, but my mom was rattled. My mom wasn't comfortable with me working at a truck stop, and we got my location switched to a McDonald's that was closer in town and wasn't connected to a gas station. She suspected someone at work saw my name tag, maybe called schools to find me. What we think might have happened is someone saw my name tag and possibly called all the schools in the area until they found me. How they knew my last name was a mystery that gnawed at us. The truck stop took on a darker edge after that. I noticed customers who lingered, their eyes too keen, their questions too pointed. The name tag I'd worn without thought felt like a beacon, broadcasting my identity to anyone watching. We moved me to a safer McDonald's, closer to home, but the fear stuck. I started checking over my shoulder, avoiding dark corners. What if I hadn't texted my mom? Would I have walked out straight into someone's trap? The thought was a cold weight, a reminder that danger could hide behind a familiar voice, waiting for a single mistake. Story number 25, The Shadow in the Room. The house was old, its bones creaking under the weight of secrets. I was 15, a skeptic who scoffed at ghost stories, staying at my sister-in-law's parents' place for a weekend. I was invited to stay at my, at the time, sister-in-law's parents' house to meet them for the first time. The room they gave me was a cluttered box, no door, just a doorway spilling hallway light, casting jagged shadows. The room that I was going to stay in was fairly small and had a mini pool table, treadmill, bed, and a tall dresser with a TV at top. There was no door to the room, just the doorway, which they kept main hallway light on throughout the night, and carpeted floor. The night started normal. I was glued to my Xbox 360, playing Borderlands. The TV's glow a beacon in the dark. This was around the time Borderlands came out, and I had played that game endlessly and beat it several times. Since I was going to stay there for about 3 days, I brought my 360 and Borderlands with me. A bag of Doritos sat on the mini pool table beside my iPod. The room a cozy mess. The mini pool table was to the left as you entered and served as a nightstand for the small, twin-sized bed in the room where I placed my iPod Touch and an empty bag of Doritos. But the clothes on the treadmill kept catching my eye, shifting in the corner of my vision. It wasn't just my imagination. As I was playing, the clothing on the treadmill kept looking like it was moving or changing shape. I laughed it off to my friend on voice chat, blaming the TV's flicker. This happened 3 times before I mentioned it to my friend, which I laughed off. But an hour later, it sharpened, the clothes twisting into a shape. About an hour passed, and the clothing started to morph again, but this time it was appearing more defined. Then Owl appeared, perched on the treadmill, its eyes locked on me. It looked like all of a sudden there was an owl perched on the panel of this treadmill. The room felt alive. I could feel it looking at me, and I could sort of see it out of the peripheral of my eye. I froze, watching without looking. I stopped controlling my character and tried to focus on this owl without directly looking at it, using peripheral vision. It remained there looking directly at me. When I met its gaze, it held, then faded into the clothes. Without closing my eyes or losing mental focus, I looked directly at it, and whatever it was, it remained there for a couple of seconds, then quickly faded into the clothing again. My friend's voice cut out, the chat silent, the room colder. The game turned against me. The guide button failed, the menu frozen. I pressed the guide button to check to see if it was still in the voice chat. The sound played as if the guide was opened, and the game went semi-dark, as it does when the menu pops up, but the menu guide didn't populate. A voice boomed, "You don't belong here." Then there was a dialogue that I had never heard before, but the first line was, "You don't belong here," in a deep voice. Then, "You don't want to be here." There was about a 5-second gap before the second dialogue occurred, which was, "You don't want to be here." My friend was still there, but heard nothing. I immediately asked him if he heard anything that I said, and he said that he didn't hear me say anything. The unease grew, a weight in the air. I fell asleep, restless, only to wake to a crinkling sound. My sleep was mildly interrupted by what sounded like the snack-sized bag of Doritos being crumpled in somebody's hand. I thought it was cleaning, but it persisted. As I'm laying there with my eyes closed and trying to go back to sleep, the sound of the crumpling bag didn't stop after what felt like an entire minute. Annoyed, I turned over, and my blood ran cold. I turned over from my left side to my right to see the room still dark with the light from the hallway bleeding into the room, giving light to the closet doors on the far side of the room. A figure stood by my bed, and in the matter of what felt like maybe 5 seconds total, I saw this dark, hooded person sort of shape standing immediately to the side of the bed. It was semi-transparent, the closet faintly visible through it. The wall, closet, and other junk were somewhat visible through this person, which I was only then the first 2 seconds seeing the hip and chest of this figure, which had a sort of slight transparency about it, around what would be maybe 50 to 60% opaqueness. I looked up, no face, just a hooded void, staring. Realizing, though, that this figure was actually in front of me, I began to look up towards its face. There were no distinctive features where a face would have been. It moved. While I couldn't see the face, I felt and saw it not looking forward towards the wall, but instead directly down at me, staring at me as I just stared at it. Fear surged as it sprinted out, silent, a perfect turn through the doorway. The figure, at a sprinting pace, left the room through the doorway. I watched this figure leave the room, following the length of the room to execute a flawless 90-degree turn through the doorway. No sound, no steps. As it moved, there was no sound, no footsteps or anything. It was completely quiet after the crumbling stopped when I met its face. I dove under the blankets, heart racing. Fear immediately overcame me. I flipped over and threw the blanket over my head. I grabbed my iPod, 5 Fit. Once I grabbed it, I rolled over and went back under the covers and looked at the time displayed on the screen. The time was 5:50 a.m. Dawn was near, but not near enough. And this meant that there were only around 30 minutes until the sun would start to light up the windows of the room. I stayed awake. The room no longer mine, morning brought uneasy calm. As the rest of the house began their morning routines and breakfast began, I joined my brother at the table. I shared fragments, wary. He asked me how I slept, and I hesitantly started to give him just the core details. He said the house had a ghost, and he said that, yeah, her parents say this place has a ghost in it that lives here as well. His mother-in-law confirmed a spirit lived there. His mother-in-law doubled down on my brother's claim that she had told him that a spirit lived in that house. I left, relieved. Luckily, this was my final evening there, and I went back home later that day. The house changed me. In any case, this event certainly moved me from a non-believer to be a bit of a skeptic, I guess. On the topic of ghosts and spirits, I started noticing flickers, odd sounds, a sense of being watched. That figure wasn't a trick, it was a warning tied to the house's past. Whispers of a tragedy, a presence that never left, claiming the dark as its own. Story number 26, The Shadow That Follows. The streets of Vancouver were too quiet that February night. Lucas, a university student with long black hair, packed up after a late study session, ready for a short walk to a friend's house. Canada felt safe, and his high school sports days gave him confidence. But 800 meters into his trek, a presence loomed behind him. Before he could turn, an arm locked around his neck, choking him hard. His vision blurred, blood pounding in his veins. With a desperate kick, he bent the attacker's knee, followed by a brutal strike to free himself. Punching through adrenaline, he ensured the man stayed down, then fled, calling the police. The attacker, a stalker, had mistaken him for a classmate. Lucas survived, but the night planted a seed of dread that would grow. As a child, Lucas was no stranger to the strange. His sleepwalking terrified his sister, who believed their house was haunted. One night, she found him lying on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, unresponsive to her calls. He later sat upright, gazing blankly. Hours later, she woke to find him standing at her bed, staring down. She fled to their parents, but Lucas was back in bed, sleeping soundly. After a house cleansing, the sleepwalking stopped. But Lucas, drawn to the unknown, felt something had noticed him. When you go looking, something comes looking for you. At Janine, insomnia kept Lucas awake in a heavy, oppressive apartment. One night, dread washed over him, paralyzing. He forced his eyes open and saw her, a girl his age, long black hair, in a pink polka-dotted nightgown, staring at the wall beside his bed. She didn't move, didn't breathe. He hid under the covers, heart racing, until the feeling passed. When he looked again, she was gone. The apartment's weight never left. Doors creaking, a black mass lingering in doorways. Lucas, alone after school, felt watched, as if the girl had left something behind. Years later, at his stepmother's rural home, the strange followed, caring for her during cancer treatment. Lucas was alone when 4 figures appeared in the yard, approaching the porch. No knock came. He checked outside. Nothing. Weeks later, a slam echoed upstairs, like someone falling twice. His dog, Sky, refused to climb the stairs. Lucas found his room destroyed, clothes strewn, bed unmade, a kennel's door neatly removed. He and Sky slept downstairs, shaken. The house seemed to pulse with intent, daring him to confront it. Lucas stayed at his boyfriend's house, where paranormal games were common, but one night, a broom flew across the porch unprovoked. Later, he saw a creature, squat, golem-like, scuttle across the driveway and vanish. Petrified, he barely slept. Hours later, his boyfriend's voice called, "Why are the lights out? Open the door." Lucas approached the door, but instinct screamed not to touch it. He hid, trembling. His boyfriend later denied calling. The kitchen often whispered help from the pantry. Lucas knew then something had claimed him, and it wasn't letting go. Cool. Lucas's life was a tapestry of the inexplicable, each thread tightening the grip of something unseen. The stalker's attack had been human, but it awoke a deeper fear. He had always been drawn to the supernatural, collecting oddities as a child, reading about spirits and energies. At 13, the apartment's black mass had watched him from doorways, vanishing when he turned. He tried to dismiss it as nerves, but the weight of the place was undeniable. His parents, police officers, were rarely home, leaving him to face the creaking doors alone. The girl in the nightgown never returned, but her presence lingered in the mirrors. Lucas began to wonder if he'd invited something by dabbling in the unknown. At his stepmother's, the incidents escalated. The destroyed room wasn't the end. Shadows darted in his peripheral vision, and his iPod took photos of empty rooms. Lucas, now dove deeper into the supernatural, meditating to connect with whatever was there. It answered. Doors slammed. Shadows grew bolder. He felt like a beacon, drawing entities with his curiosity. Skux, the German shepherd, became his sentinel, growling at corners where nothing stood. Lucas began to suspect the house wasn't the source. Something was following him, tied to his very being. The boyfriend's home was a crucible. His brother's dark rituals, candles, symbols, muttered chants, set Lucas on edge. The golem-like creature wasn't the only anomaly. Objects moved slightly, a glass shifting on the counter, a book falling open. The pantry's whispers grew insistent. "Help! Help!" as if trapped. Lucas ignored them, but the air grew thick with malice. The night of the voice was the worst. He'd felt it, watching, waiting for him to open the door. His boyfriend's confusion confirmed it wasn't him. Lucas stopped visiting, but the entity didn't stop. It followed him to new places, new homes, new fears. At 18, Lucas moved in with his sister. A clock with no battery spun wildly in her room. They set up cameras, capturing a hand flickering on the couch, a computer flashing on and off, objects falling. Lucas urged her to stop engaging, and the activity slowed after a cleansing. But he knew it wasn't gone. His first house felt clean at first, but voices soon echoed from the basement. He installed security, but sensors triggered without cause. Garage doors, windows, pool access. Cameras showed nothing, yet the alerts persisted. Lucas began to feel it wasn't a voyeur. It was the same shadow, testing his resolve. At 25, Lucas faced the entity head-on. While trimming his dog's nails, thundering footsteps rushed him, an icy chill grazing his neck. He shouted for it to leave, slamming the door. In the kitchen, a black mass peeked over the cabinets, vanishing when he looked. He grew numb, ignoring the signs. After a 2-week trip, he returned to find every picture knocked off the walls. He apologized to the entity, half sarcastically, and the house quieted. But one night, a horrific presence filled his room, paralyzing him. He kept his eyes closed, refusing to acknowledge it. It hasn't returned since, but Lucas knows it's waiting. The shadow has followed him through homes, through years, through his own curiosity and defiance. He's closed his mind, but the weight remains. Each incident, the stalker, the girl, the creature, the voices, feels like a piece of a puzzle he's afraid to solve. Is it one entity or many? Is it drawn to his openness or cursed to him from birth? Lucas lives cautiously now, his dogs and cameras his only comfort. But the shadow lingers, patient, eternal.